Sarah had always dreamed of living in a peaceful, picturesque neighborhood. Every morning she would walk through her garden, adjusting the flowers, trimming the hedges, and placing her favorite decoration, a small, cheerful gnome with sunglasses. It was quirky, harmless, and made her smile, but one ordinary morning everything changed. A crisp envelope lay on her porch, stamped with the HOA logo. Hands trembling, Sarah opened it. The words on the paper seemed unreal. She was being fined $50,000 for the gnome in her garden, a tiny, smiling gnome, and suddenly it was a violation. Confused and anxious, Sarah went to her neighbor, Mr. Thompson. "Did you see this gnome?" she asked. He shook his head. "I haven't even noticed it," he said, "but apparently someone complained to the HOA." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The board had already gained a reputation for strict, sometimes unreasonable enforcement, and now she was in their crosshairs. Within days, letters piled up, each one more aggressive than the last. The HOA warned of fines, escalating into tens of thousands of dollars. Sarah's peaceful neighborhood now felt like a minefield. She couldn't understand. The gnome had been there for years without issue. Why now? Determined to fight, Sarah delved into the HOA rulebook. Every page was filled with vague restrictions, confusing clauses, and contradictory statements, yet the HOA demanded compliance. The more she read, the more she realized how arbitrary and rigid the board's enforcement truly was. She spoke with neighbors who had faced similar situations. One had been fined for a mailbox slightly off color, another for a flag displayed incorrectly, a third for a small flower decoration. The HOA's power was absolute, its interpretations unpredictable. Sarah knew she wasn't just fighting for a gnome, she was fighting against an entire system built on fear and control. Late at night, sitting in her living room, Sarah looked at her gnome, its tiny sunglasses gleaming in the moonlight. She whispered to herself, "I won't let them win." Every fiber of her being told her she had to stand firm. The battle was just beginning, and the quiet neighborhood she once loved had transformed into a stage for a dramatic showdown with the HOA. Sarah woke up the next morning to find yet another letter from the HOA. Her heart raced as she tore it open. The board was now threatening legal action. A court date had been set, and if she didn't comply, the fines would double. $50,000 seemed small compared to what could come next. She felt a surge of anger and disbelief. The gnome, her innocent, cheerful gnome, had become the center of a full-blown neighborhood war. Sarah called her lawyer, who listened patiently before speaking. "You're facing a board that thrives on intimidation," he said. "We need to prepare carefully." Over the next few days, tension in the neighborhood grew. Whispers spread from porch to porch. Some neighbors secretly cheered Sarah on, while others feared the wrath of the HOA. Every glance at her gnome felt like a challenge. Sarah's home, once a sanctuary, now felt like the front line of a battle she hadn't asked for. Then came the first shocking twist. A letter from the HOA revealed that the complainant wasn't a neighbor at all. Someone from outside the community had seen a photo of the gnome online and reported it as offensive. The absurdity was breathtaking. Sarah laughed in disbelief, but the HOA insisted the fine still stood. Determined to fight, Sarah documented everything. Emails, letters, photos, every interaction with the HOA became evidence. Each day brought new anxiety, but also a growing resolve. She realized this wasn't just about a gnome anymore. This was about standing up to an unjust system. One night, as Sarah reviewed her documents, she noticed something chilling. The HOA board members had a pattern. Fines targeted residents who challenged their authority before. It wasn't random. It was a calculated exercise of control. Sarah shivered. The stakes had grown higher than she ever imagined, but in the heart of the storm, she felt a spark of hope. If she fought smart, and if she stayed calm, the truth was on her side. She would face the board in court, and she would show them that rules are meaningless when they are enforced without reason. The tiny gnome in her garden had become a symbol, a beacon of courage against the HOA's tyranny. The day of the court hearing arrived. Sarah's palms were sweaty as she stepped into the courtroom, clutching her folder of evidence. The HOA board sat across, stern-faced, confident that fear alone would win the day. The judge called the case. The HOA attorney began presenting their argument, a list of alleged violations, exaggerated interpretations of vague rules, and a constant insistence that the gnome violated community standards. Every word seemed designed to intimidate, Sarah's heart pounded. Then her lawyer stood, calm, precise, and firm. He presented the evidence, emails, letters, and photos, proving that the gnome was harmless. He showed past precedents where the HOA had fined others without real justification. Each point systematically dismantled the board's case. A twist no one expected came next. The judge asked for the original complaint. The HOA attorney hesitated. The complainant had never actually seen the gnome in person. It was based on a rumor spread online. The courtroom fell silent. Sarah's pulse raced. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. Their confidence was cracking. Sarah realized this was her moment. Her lawyer emphasized that rules enforced without logic or fairness could not stand in a court of law. Every word struck like lightning. Then the judge made a decision. The fine is reversed, he declared. The homeowner may keep her property as it stands. The HOA's actions were unjustified. Relief washed over Sarah. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her gnome, standing proudly in the garden, its tiny sunglasses catching the light. The neighborhood erupted in whispered celebrations. Residents who had quietly feared the HOA now felt emboldened. But the story didn't end there. The HOA board had learned a lesson. They would think twice before targeting residents without cause. Sarah's small gnome had become a symbol of courage, persistence, and justice. Walking home after the hearing, Sarah smiled. She had faced fear, intimidation, and absurdity, and won. The gnome, once a simple garden decoration, now represented something far greater, the triumph of reason over tyranny. Her story would be remembered in the neighborhood for years to come. And every time someone glanced at the tiny gnome, they remembered that even the smallest stand against injustice can create the biggest impact. Sarah thought the nightmare was over after the courtroom victory, but the HOA was relentless. Just days later, a new notice arrived, this time, alleging disturbance of neighborhood aesthetics because of the way her gnome reflected sunlight onto a neighbor's driveway. Her pulse quickened. Was it possible the board could create problems out of nothing? Sarah knew she had to remain calm. She contacted her lawyer again, who warned her, the HOA thrives on fear. They will test your resolve at every turn. Determined not to be intimidated, Sarah documented the reflection herself, taking measurements, photographs, and even videos to show there was no real harm. But the suspense wasn't just legal. Whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. Some residents feared the HOA's wrath. Others secretly cheered her bravery. Then the first shocking twist struck. An anonymous note slipped under her door, suggested that some board members were personally invested in keeping the neighborhood perfect for resale values, meaning Sarah's gnome wasn't just violation of rules. It was threatening their financial interests. The stakes had escalated far beyond what she imagined. Every day became a high-wire act. Sarah had to carefully maintain her garden without giving the HOA any reason to strike again. Her gnome, once a simple decoration, now felt like a target in an invisible war. And just when she thought things couldn't get more intense, a rumor spread that the HOA might try to have her fined for emotional distress caused to neighbors, a claim so absurd it almost seemed like a nightmare. Sarah's courage was being tested like never before, but her determination had grown stronger. Late at night, staring at the gnome in the moonlight, Sarah whispered, "You and I are in this together." Let them try. The suspense had reached its peak. The HOA was more dangerous than anyone had imagined, but Sarah's resolve had become unshakable. The tension had reached a breaking point. Sarah knew the HOA wouldn't stop until they were fully challenged, and she was ready. With her lawyer by her side, she prepared for the board's next move. Every letter, every notice, every whisper had taught her the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. On a bright morning, a final notice arrived. The HOA was threatening a second court hearing, this time for aesthetic violations stemming from her gnome's placement. But Sarah was no longer afraid. She had documented everything meticulously, and her evidence was irrefutable. Walking into the courtroom, Sarah felt the familiar surge of anxiety, quickly replaced by determination. The HOA attorney smirked, confident their intimidation tactics would work. But Sarah had a secret twist ready, a previously undiscovered clause in the neighborhood manual that directly contradicted the board's claims. The courtroom fell silent as her lawyer presented the evidence. There is no rule prohibiting garden gnomes, he stated firmly, and these alleged disturbances are purely speculative. The HOA's actions are arbitrary and unfounded. The first shocking twist came from the gallery. A neighbor, previously silent, stood up and revealed he had secretly recorded the HOA meetings, proving the board had deliberately targeted residents to maintain control. Gasps filled the courtroom. The HOA members' confidence wavered. Then came the ultimate twist. The judge, reading through the evidence, leaned forward. It is clear the board has overstepped its authority. Not only is the fine reversed, but the HOA is warned against further arbitrary enforcement. Relief, joy, and disbelief collided in Sarah's chest. The gnome, her once simple garden decoration, now symbolized triumph against an unfair system. Neighbors who had lived in fear now looked at her with admiration, inspired by her courage. Sarah returned home, the sunlight glinting off the gnome's tiny sunglasses. She whispered, "We did it." We won. The HOA had been defeated, but more importantly, Sarah had shown that persistence, courage, and truth could overcome even the most unreasonable power. And in that quiet neighborhood, stories of her bravery spread. The gnome became legendary, a symbol of justice, resilience, and the victory of the ordinary against tyranny. Just when Sarah thought the battle with the HOA was over, another shock awaited. A mysterious email landed in her inbox late at night, unsigned, but unmistakably connected to the board. It read, "We are watching. Rules will be enforced. Do not test us again." Sarah's heart raced. The victory in court had emboldened her, but the HOA had shown that they could be relentless, even outside formal channels. Every step she took now felt like walking through a minefield. The gnome, once a symbol of harmless joy, had become a lightning rod for tension. The suspense escalated further when a neighborhood meeting was suddenly called. Board members confronted her in front of other residents, attempting to intimidate her with threats of fines, inspections, and legal maneuvering. But Sarah stayed calm. Her confidence had grown. She knew the law and her rights. Then came a dramatic twist. One board member accidentally revealed that several fines were not just about aesthetic violations, but were aimed at residents who challenged the board's authority in the past. Gasps echoed through the room. The HOA's power, once invisible and intimidating, was now exposed as manipulative. Sarah realized the battle wasn't just personal, it had become symbolic. Every resident watching her stood at a crossroads, submit to fear or support courage. And then another twist hit. A video leaked showing a board member coaching others on how to exaggerate minor issues into fines. The neighborhood was stunned. The tension reached its peak as Sarah quietly returned home, her gnome glowing under the moonlight. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was her determination. She knew that the HOA could try again, but she was ready for whatever they would throw at her next. Every twist, every threat, only fueled her resolve.